Okay, so have you ever felt like just drowning in information?
Mm.
Like, you know what I mean? Where like the internet just throws all this stuff at you that you're supposed to know. And it's like, whoa, how do I even keep up with all of this? It can be totally overwhelming.
It really can.
But, the fact that you're here with us means that you're not giving up. You're looking for a better way to learn, a smarter way to learn, a more effective way.
Absolutely. And, it's not just about learning more. It's about learning well, right? Like really absorbing the information, understanding it, and being able to actually use it.
Totally. And that's what we're diving into today. We're taking a deep dive into this book you brought to us, 5 Dimensions of Learning Susho Duels.
This book is packed with insights. So many aha moments. And our goal in this deep dive is to distill those down for you, to give you the most important, most surprising takeaways about how we learn. And then even more importantly, we're going to arm you with some really practical strategies.
Like actual things you can do, right? Not just theory.
Exactly. Things you can implement in your own life to become a more effective learner. And not just effective, but also more motivated. Because let's face it, staying motivated, that can be the hardest part.
Totally agree. And speaking of motivation, or maybe lack thereof, the first thing this book jumps into is what the author calls learning identification idea. And right off the bat, he talks about this feeling of knowledge anxiety. And I think a lot of us can relate to this, right? Like there's just so much to know, and we constantly feel like we're behind.
Oh, it's so real. It's like this pressure, this constant pressure to be learning, to be acquiring new knowledge and skills. And it can be paralyzing, Instead of feeling empowered by all the information out there, we end up feeling inadequate, like we're not doing enough.
It's like FOMO, but for knowledge, right?
Yes. Knowledge FOMO.
Yeah.
I love that. The author actually tells a story about this classmate of his in Beijing who went back for a high school reunion. And, reunions can be a breeding ground for comparison, right?
Oh, tell me about it. Well, this guy, he's at the reunion, and he's just feeling totally out of his depth compared to his old classmates. Everyone seems to have achieved so much. They're all talking about their impressive careers and skills, and he just feels like he's falling behind. So what does he do?
Let me guess. He goes on a course buying spree.
Ding, ding, ding.
Yeah.
He starts buying all these online courses, like anything and everything he can get his hands on. Brain training, personal finance, you name it. But here's the thing, and I think this is where a lot of us get tripped up. He buys the courses, but he doesn't actually take them.
The classic "I'll get to it later" syndrome.
Exactly. And they just sit there collecting virtual dust. So much for self-improvement, right?
Yeah, it's like, what's the point of having all this knowledge if you're not actually engaging with it? It's like having a gym membership but never going.
Totally. And that's where the author brings in this really helpful framework, which he calls the learning pyramid model. It's basically a way to bring some structure and focus to our learning in this crazy, overwhelming world of information. So picture a pyramid.
Okay, got it. A pyramid.
And imagine a person standing in the middle of this pyramid, balanced on 2 really important pillars. These pillars represent the foundation of effective learning.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What are these foundational pillars?
The first one is doing efficiency.
Doing efficiency, okay.
And the second one is doing pleasure.
Interesting. So let's start with doing efficiency. What's the main idea behind that?
Basically, this module is all about those practical skills that we need in our daily lives, in our work, and in our relationships. It's about being effective, getting things done, being competent. Think about things like, negotiation skills, public speaking, time management, maybe even things like cooking or basic home repairs.
Yeah, like those essential life skills that actually make a difference in how we navigate the world.
Exactly. The author really stresses 2 key points here. First, you should focus on learning things that you're actually going to use. No point in cramming your brain with information that's just going to sit there, right?
Totally agree. It's about being strategic with your learning.
And the second point is the importance of practice. You can read all the books and watch all the tutorials you want, but if you don't actually put that knowledge into practice, it's not going to stick.
It's like learning to ride a bike by just reading the manual. You got to get on the bike and actually try it.
Exactly. The author actually uses his own career path as an example here. Early on, when he was working in sales, he really focused on learning anything and everything that could help him boost his sales numbers.
Makes sense.
But then, when he moved into management, his learning focus shifted. He started learning about time management, negotiation skills, leadership strategies, all the things that were directly relevant to his new role. So it's about being adaptable and really focusing on what's going to give you the biggest payoff right now.
So practical. I love that. Okay, so that's doing efficiency. What about doing pleasure? This one sounds more, well, pleasurable.
It is. This module is all about nurturing those genuine lifelong interests that bring you real joy. And I'm not talking about like mindless scrolling on social media or binge watching Netflix. This is about finding those activities that really light you up, that give you a deep sense of satisfaction and fulfillment.
I love that. It's about cultivating those passions that bring you lasting happiness, not just fleeting distractions.
Exactly. The author uses his own love for calligraphy and traditional painting as an example here. He says it's something he can turn to anytime, anywhere, and it always brings him a sense of peace and joy no matter what else is going on in his life.
That's beautiful. It's like finding those personal sanctuaries that recharge and inspire you.
Totally. And it's not just about these individual categories in isolation. The real magic happens when you find a balance between all four modules of the pyramid. Because, when you're feeling fulfilled and engaged in your life, it actually makes you a more effective learner in all areas.
Oh, that makes sense. It's like when you're feeling good and you're energized by your passions, learning just becomes more natural and enjoyable.
Exactly. So we have our two foundational pillars, doing efficiency and doing pleasure. Now, let's move up the pyramid to the next level, which is self-cognition, Chesho. And as the name suggests, this is where we start digging a little deeper into ourselves.
Self-awareness, that's such a crucial but often overlooked aspect of personal growth, isn't it?
It really is. And this module emphasizes the importance of understanding ourselves better, like really taking the time to explore our strengths, our weaknesses, our values, our beliefs, our motivations. And the author argues that a lot of the challenges people face in their lives, in their careers, in their relationships, they often stem from a lack of self-awareness.
Makes sense. If we don't understand ourselves, how can we expect to understand others or effectively navigate the world around us?
Exactly. And to improve our self-cognition, the book highlights the importance of seeking feedback from others. And it actually offers a really interesting piece of advice from Tasha Eurich, an organizational psychologist, about who we should be seeking feedback from.
I'm all ears. Tell me more.
So she suggests reaching out to people who aren't necessarily our closest friends and family members. Instead, she recommends seeking feedback from people who are insightful, who are known for their objectivity, and who might be able to give us a more, honest assessment.
That's interesting. So not necessarily the people who are always going to sugarcoat things or tell us what we want to hear.
Exactly. Because let's be honest, sometimes our loved ones, they might be hesitant to give us truly critical feedback. They don't want to hurt our feelings, right? But someone who's a bit more removed, they might be able to offer a more unbiased perspective.
I can see that. It's like getting a second opinion from a doctor who hasn't been treating you for years.
Totally. It's about actively seeking out different vantage points to get a more well-rounded view of ourselves. And sometimes that means hearing things we might not necessarily want to hear, but ultimately it's for our own growth and development.
It's that whole growth mindset idea, right? Embracing challenges and feedback as opportunities to learn and improve.
Exactly. And that brings us to the final level of the pyramid, the peak, worldview.
This one sounds like the broadest perspective of them all.
It is. This module is all about expanding our horizons by learning about the world beyond our immediate bubble. And it's not just about accumulating facts and figures. It's about developing a deeper understanding of how the world works, the forces that shape it, the interconnectedness of different cultures and systems.
So it's about seeing the bigger picture, understanding the context in which we exist.
Exactly. And the author argues that a well-developed worldview is crucial for making sound judgments and decisions, both in our personal lives and in our careers. He even shares his own experience of transitioning between different industries, from telecom to fashion to internet tech, and how having a broader perspective helped him navigate those shifts.
It's like having a mental map of the world that helps you make sense of all the complexities and changes.
Totally. And, after laying out this whole pyramid framework, the author gives us a really important piece of advice. Don't try to learn everything at once.
Oh, that's so tempting, though, isn't it? Especially with all the resources available to us now.
It is tempting, but he reminds us that we're not superhuman, right? We have limited time and energy. He brings up this idea of the 3/8 in a day. 8 hours for sleep, 8 for work, and 8 for free time.
Right. The classic time management breakdown.
And realistically, most of us probably only have about 2 to 3 hours a day that we can actually dedicate to focused learning.
Which means we need to be really intentional about what we choose to focus on, right?
Exactly. It's not about quantity, it's about quality. It's far better to master one skill or deeply understand one subject than to dabble superficially in a dozen different things.
So prioritize and focus. Got it.
Okay, so we've established this framework for what we should focus on learning. But then the book takes a really interesting turn, and it challenges this very common notion that simply collecting information is the same as learning. In fact, the author calls it azure. Collecting is becoming a form of pseudo-learning.
Oh, this is so relevant, especially in the age of digital hoarding, right?
Totally. We bookmark articles, we save videos, we download ebooks, we create endless to-read lists. But are we actually learning anything?
It's like our pocket apps are overflowing with good intentions, but not much actual engagement. I know mine is.
Same here. And the author introduces Andre Jourdain's definition of learning, which I think is really helpful in understanding why just collecting falls short. Jourdain says that learning is about changing our preconceived notions when faced with a challenging situation.
So it's not just about adding new facts to our mental library. It's about actually shifting our understanding of something when our current understanding proves to be inadequate. It's about that friction of encountering a problem that forces us to rethink our assumptions.
Exactly. And Jourdain outlines a four-step process for this. First, we encounter a confusing situation. Second, we feel frustrated because our existing knowledge can't explain it. Third, we actively seek out new information to address that frustration. And fourth, we apply that new information to build a new, more robust understanding.
So true learning involves this active process of struggling, seeking, and rebuilding our understanding. It's not passive.
Exactly. And simply collecting information bypasses all of that. We're skipping the crucial steps of actually wrestling with a problem and feeling that frustration that pushes us to truly engage with new information.
It's like taking a bunch of photos on vacation, but never actually looking at them or reflecting on the experience. You're not really absorbing it.
The perfect analogy. And to really drive this point home, the book also emphasizes the importance of output in learning. There's a really powerful analogy about the Atlanta UPS sorting center. Have you heard this one?
No, I haven't. Tell me about it.
Okay, so imagine this huge sorting center, right? And tons of packages are arriving every single day. If no one takes the time to sort those packages, to label them, to direct them to their proper destinations, what happens?
Well, they just end up sitting there lost in the chaos.
Exactly. And it's the same with information. If we just passively consume and collect, if we don't take the time to process it, to connect it to what we already know, to actively use it in some way, and that's the output part, then it's very likely to just get lost in the mental clutter.
So the act of explaining something to someone else, writing about it, applying it to solve a problem, that's the mental sorting process that prevents information from getting lost in our brains.
Exactly. Now, to combat this pseudo-learning trap, the author offers 3 strategies for developing our learning identification. He calls these strategies learning from programmers, learning from doctors, and learning from traffic police.
Okay, those are some interesting analogies. I'm curious to hear how those play out.
Let's start with learning from programmers. When you think of programmers, what comes to mind?
Well, I kind of picture them hunched over their computers, typing away furiously in a dimly lit room, surrounded by empty coffee cups.
That's the classic image, right? But the key takeaway here is their highly focused problem-solving approach. Programmers, they're constantly trying to fix bugs, to optimize code, to achieve very specific goals. And they're very intentional about the information they consume. They don't have that tourist mentality of just collecting everything they come across. They're very selective. They understand that it's better to have too little information than too much if it's not directly relevant to the problem they're trying to solve.
Makes sense. So the lesson here is to be more discerning with our information consumption, to really focus on what's relevant to our goals and to avoid getting bogged down in unnecessary details.
Exactly. Now, what about learning from doctors? Think about what a doctor does when a patient comes in with a list of symptoms.
Well, they have to quickly assess the situation, figure out what's important, and make a diagnosis, right?
Exactly. And the author highlights 2 key principles that doctors use that we can apply to our own learning. First, they focus on keywords. They pay close attention to the patient's main complaints, the things that are causing the most discomfort. And second, they prioritize information where there are significant differences within similar content.
Yep.
If a symptom presents very differently at different times, that's a red flag. That's something they're going to investigate further. We can apply this to learning by really focusing on the core questions we're trying to answer and by paying extra attention to contrasting viewpoints or unexpected findings within related information.
So it's about filtering out the noise and focusing on the signal. Look for the anomalies, the things that stand out.
Exactly. And the third strategy, learning from traffic police. This one's all about rapid output. Just as a traffic officer immediately issues a ticket for a parking violation, we should aim to process and output new information as quickly as possible. The author mentions this 72-hour principle. It's funny, the book attributes it to little dog money, but it actually comes from the richest man in Babylon. Anyway, the idea is that when you learn something new, you should try to actively use or share that information within 72 hours to really solidify it in your mind.
It's like striking while the iron is hot, right? Get that information moving before it has a chance to fade away.
Precisely. Now, after tackling this whole issue of pseudo-learning, the book moves on to another really common belief in education. The idea of learning styles. Hi, Yoon, and tailoring learning to our individual preferences.
Oh, yeah, the whole visual learners, auditory learners, kinesthetic learners thing. We've all heard about that. I actually always thought of myself as a visual learner.
Me too. It's a really appealing idea, right? That if we can just figure out our preferred learning style, we can unlock our learning potential. However, the author delves into some really interesting research from cognitive psychology that actually challenges this widely held belief.
Oh, really? Tell me more about that.
Well, the book cites a pretty significant 2008 research paper by Pashler, McDaniel, Rohrer, and Bjork. These guys are cognitive psychologists, and they really dug into the research on learning styles. And their findings were pretty surprising. They basically found no solid evidence to support the claim that matching teaching methods to supposed learning styles actually leads to better learning outcomes.
Wow, that's unexpected. So, like, if I think I'm a visual learner, there's no real benefit to me focusing on visual learning methods.
That's what the research suggests. For example, they did experiments where some people learned new vocabulary by only seeing the words, others by only hearing them, and then they switched it up. And guess what? The results showed that regardless of the method, people remembered pretty much the same amount of vocabulary. There was no real advantage to matching the method to their supposed learning style.
So what's the takeaway here? Should we just forget about learning styles altogether?
The key takeaway is that learning primarily depends on understanding the meaning of the information, not the sensory channel through which it's delivered. Like, it doesn't really matter if you see it, hear it, or even touch it. What matters is whether you grasp the underlying concept.
So it's about engaging with the content on a deeper level, not just the surface level of how it's presented.
Exactly. And the book uses this classic chess player memory experiment by Simon and Chase to illustrate this point. Have you heard of this one?
Remind me how it goes.
Okay, so they showed chess players a chessboard with pieces arranged in a plausible game scenario for just 5 seconds. They took the board away and asked the players to remember the positions of the pieces. And what they found was that expert chess players could remember way more pieces than novice players. But here's the twist. When they showed them chessboards with pieces placed randomly with no logical game structure, the expert's memory advantage disappeared completely.
So it wasn't that expert chess players just had better visual memory overall. It was that they could make sense of the arrangement of the pieces because they understood the underlying logic of the game.
Exactly. They could chunk the information together because it had meaning within the context of their expertise. And that's the key takeaway for us as learners. It's not about our perceived sensory strengths. It's about our ability to connect new information to our existing knowledge and experience.
That's like the more we understand about a topic, the easier it is to learn new things within that domain.
Precisely. And so instead of focusing on our perceived strengths, the book actually encourages us to identify our areas of weakness. Because, if we only stick to what we think we're good at, we might be avoiding the very areas where we have the most potential for growth.
That's a good point. It's like if you're afraid of public speaking, maybe that's the area you should really focus on improving, even though it might feel uncomfortable.
Exactly. And this leads to the introduction of the Dunning-Kruger effect. You familiar with that one?
Oh, yeah, that's the one where people who are incompetent at something tend to overestimate their abilities, right?
Exactly. It's that cognitive bias where, the less you know about something, the more confident you are in your knowledge. And on the flip side, the more you know, the more you realize how much you don't know.
It's like that saying, the more you learn, the more you realize how much you don't know.
Exactly. And the author breaks down the Dunning-Kruger effect into 3 stages. First, there's Mount Stupid, where you're blissfully unaware of your own incompetence.
Oh, we've all been there.
Then comes the valley of despair, where you start to realize just how much you don't know and you feel kind of overwhelmed. And finally, there's the slope of enlightenment, where you're consciously competent, you're aware of your strengths and weaknesses, and you're continuously learning and improving.
So the key is to get ourselves out of that valley of despair and onto that slope of enlightenment.
Exactly. And according to the book, the way to do that is through metacognition.
Metacognition. Okay, I think I've heard of that term, but remind me what it means.
Essentially, it's thinking about thinking. It's about becoming more aware of our own thought processes, questioning our assumptions, and evaluating our own learning strategies.
So instead of just reacting to things on autopilot, it's about taking a step back and consciously examining how and why we're thinking the way we are.
Exactly. Like, imagine this. Instead of the simple event A happens, so I react with B, metacognition adds this extra layer of reflection. It becomes, event A happens, I react with B, but why did I react with B? Is that the best response? Maybe reaction C would be more effective, so I'll choose to react with C instead.
It's like hitting the pause button on our automatic responses and giving ourselves a chance to make a more conscious, deliberate choice.
Exactly. The author shares his own experience learning English as an example of how he initially lacked metacognition. He struggled with vocabulary, and his immediate reaction was just to give up, to assume that he wasn't good at languages.
So that was the event A leads to reaction B scenario.
Exactly. But later on, as he developed his metacognitive skills, he started to question those assumptions. He asked himself, is skipping this unknown word really hindering my understanding? Is this a unique challenge just for me? Or is it something that all language learners struggle with?
It's like he became his own learning coach, analyzing his own thought process and adjusting his approach as needed.
Exactly. And that's what metacognition is all about. It's about becoming an active observer of our own learning journey, identifying the real roadblocks, and adjusting our strategies accordingly.
It's about taking ownership of our learning process, not just blaming our perceived learning style or our innate abilities.
Okay, so we've tackled identifying what to learn, and we've debunked some myths about how we learn best. Now the book moves on to a crucial element, learning motivation, or, as the author puts it, loving learning from the inside out.
Motivation. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? How do we stay motivated, especially when it comes to those long-term learning goals? Because let's be honest, it's easy to get excited at the beginning, but that initial enthusiasm often fades over time.
It really does, and the author acknowledges this challenge. He introduces three main types of learning motivation: intrinsic drive, extrinsic drive, and task-driven learning.
Okay, let's break those down. Let's start with intrinsic drive. What is that all about?
Intrinsic drive is that pure, unadulterated joy of learning for its own sake. It's that feeling of curiosity, a fascination, of wanting to understand something just because it's interesting. The author gives some great examples, like his child's obsession with Harry Potter, which led him to naturally absorb English vocabulary without even realizing he was learning. Or a friend of his who was so passionate about cars that he just devoured any information he could find about them, eventually turning that passion into a successful business.
It's like when learning feels effortless because you're so genuinely engaged with the subject matter.
Exactly. But the book also acknowledges that intrinsic motivation isn't always readily available, especially for all the things we need to learn as adults. Sometimes we just have to learn things that aren't inherently fascinating to us.
Right. Like, I'm not sure anyone finds filing taxes intrinsically motivating, but it's something we all have to do.
Totally.
Yeah.
And that's where extrinsic drive comes in. This is about finding motivation from external factors, things like rewards, recognition, or even the fear of negative consequences.
The classic carrot and stick approach.
Exactly. And the book talks about this concept of sweetness on both ends. Like, there's a sweetness of achieving something you aspire to, and then there's the sweetness of avoiding something you fear.
So it's the push and pull of positive and negative reinforcement.
Exactly. Think about going to the gym, right? You might be motivated by the desire to get fitter and healthier, but you might also be motivated by the fear of becoming unhealthy or gaining weight. It works both ways.
It's like wanting to look good in a swimsuit versus not wanting to have health problems later in life.
Oh, totally. And the author shares his own experience with learning English, which was initially driven by, honestly, a bit of envy towards those who could communicate effectively in the language. He wanted to be part of those conversations, to access those opportunities. And then there's this powerful image he describes of unseen beauty approaching as you put in the effort to learn.
It's like the reward is not always immediately visible, but it's there, waiting for you if you're willing to put in the work.
Exactly. Now, on the flip side of aspiration, there's the fear of inadequacy. And the book tells this really striking story about Yu Minhong, the founder of New Oriental, who was kidnapped.
Oh, wow. That's intense.
It is. And, in that moment of crisis, when he was regaining consciousness, his first thought wasn't about his physical safety. It was about whether he still remembered his English vocabulary. Because he understood that knowledge, that skill, it was a form of security.
It's like in that moment, he realized that his knowledge was something that couldn't be taken away from him, even in the face of such extreme adversity.
Exactly. And the author uses this story to emphasize the importance of cultivating a sense of crisis, even if we haven't personally faced hardship. He quotes Kai Kang-young, who says, "The more you avoid learning in your youth, the more likely you are to miss out on people and things that move you, and on new scenery later in life."
Wow, that's powerful. It's a reminder that learning isn't just about acquiring knowledge. It's about expanding our possibilities, opening ourselves up to new experiences and connections.
Exactly. So even without inherent interest, the desire for a better future or the fear of a worse one can be really powerful motivators. Now, what about task-driven learning?
Okay, what's that all about?
Task-driven learning is all about finding motivation in the things we have to do, the responsibilities that are part of our work and our lives. The author compares university students who are very career-focused to those who aren't. And he notes that the students who have a clear vision of what they want to do after graduation, they tend to be much more motivated in their studies.
Makes sense. If you can see the direct connection between what you're learning and your future goals, it's going to be much more motivating.
Exactly. And he also revisits some of his earlier examples from the learning pyramid model, like his own need to improve his time management and negotiation skills, which were directly driven by the demands of his job.
So sometimes the motivation comes from the necessity of performing well in our roles and responsibilities.
Precisely. And here's a really interesting point the book makes. Sometimes task-driven learning can actually be even more effective than interest-driven learning.
Really? That's counterintuitive.
It is, but the author gives the example of a friend who was interested in graphic design and took some courses, but he saw a much more significant improvement in his skills through the demands of his actual design work, like having to meet specific client requirements, having to work within tight deadlines. That kind of pressure actually pushed him to learn and grow much faster than he had when he was just learning for fun.
So the stakes are higher, and that forces you to really step up your game.
Exactly. And sometimes, task-driven learning can even spark interest where there wasn't any before. The book gives the example of the author's wife, who started learning to cook primarily out of the responsibility of feeding their child.
It's like necessity becomes the mother of invention and also the mother of skill development.
Totally. What started as a chore became a source of enjoyment and accomplishment. And the key to really leveraging task-driven learning, the author emphasizes, is to adopt this mindset of actively identifying and solving problems. He even suggests thinking about the search queries we make online as tasks that need solutions.
That's a great way to reframe it. Every question we have is an opportunity for task-driven learning.
Exactly. And finally, the book offers this really creative strategy for boosting motivation. Basically adopting a child's learning tasks as your own. The author gives the example of his wife learning to play the piano alongside their son.
Oh, that's sweet.
It is. And it's actually a really clever way to tap into both task-driven motivation and intrinsic motivation. Like you're learning to support your child's learning, but you're also potentially discovering a new passion for yourself.
It's like that saying, teaching is the best way to learn.
Exactly. Okay, so we've covered identifying what to learn, finding the motivation to learn it, and now we move on to learning strategy, which is all about the importance of effective learning methods. The author acknowledges that most of us aren't geniuses. Effort is crucial, but it needs to be smart effort, guided by a solid strategy, not just brute force willpower.
So it's not just about working hard, it's about working smart.
Exactly. And this section really focuses on those practical strategies for efficiently initiating, maintaining, and optimizing our learning efforts.
I love that. It's about making our learning process as smooth and effective as possible.
Absolutely. And the first strategy we dive into is rapidly entering a new field with zero su, with absolutely no foundation. And this is such a relevant skill in today's world, right? Everything's changing so fast. New technologies are emerging. New industries are popping up.
It's like we constantly have to be learning new things just to keep up. I recently had to learn how to create short videos for social media. I had no idea where to even begin.
It can be so daunting. But the author outlines 4 stages of learning a new skill, using the very relatable example of learning to drive. First, there's unconscious incompetence. We don't even know what we don't know.
Like, before you even get behind the wheel for the first time, you have no idea how much there is to learn about driving.
Exactly. Then comes conscious incompetence. We're aware of this skill, we understand the basic concepts, but we can't actually do it yet.
Like, you might pass the written driving test, but you still have no idea how to actually operate a car.
Exactly. Then there's conscious competence. We can perform the skill, but it requires focused effort and attention.
Like, you can drive, but you still have to really concentrate, especially in traffic or in challenging situations.
Totally. And finally, there's unconscious competence. We can perform the skill almost effortlessly without even thinking about it.
Like, you've been driving for so long that it's become second nature.
Exactly. And the goal when entering a new field is to at least move from that first stage of unconscious incompetence to at least conscious incompetence. Like, we want to gain that basic understanding of what we're dealing with, what the key concepts are, what skills are involved.
So it's about getting over that initial hump of not even knowing what you don't know.
Exactly. And to help us do this quickly and effectively, the book introduces a modified 3W1H model. And this is different from the learning styles 3W1H. Okay, this one is specifically designed for entering new fields, and it's actually inspired by how financial investors quickly assess new industries. Expert speaker.